the Harbor One hotline. Not sure if he is enjoying a delicious Irish breakfast or if it will be corned beef and cabbage later on. But Mike, good morning.
Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, corned beef and cabbage. We're in the process of making it. Ooh. It's a long deal to make corned beef and cabbage, right?
Yeah, very hard.
Do you have that in the slow cooker, in the crock pot, or how are you doing that?
In the slow cooker.
Okay, excellent. Well, I mentioned this earlier. Obviously, a loss last night. However, I was encouraged by the Frederick fight, which I felt like it was rather old school. I wouldn't call it Probert Domi like, but certainly I enjoyed that part of the game, and I like to see it back. I think you agree.
You know, it was an interesting fight. First of all, when people are wearing shields and helmets, it's a whole different ball of wax. But those guys both lost their lids last night.
Yeah.
So it did look like an old-fashioned fight. But, you know, when I was playing, we used to have guys that were really good at fighting, and they would teach you how to fight. I mean, I'd like somebody to spend 10 minutes with Frederick and tell him that over the top right hook is not nearly as effective as a straight jab to the head. It's just like it just takes too long to get there, and you lose a lot of your velocity with that roundhouse right that he was trying to throw. But give him credit; both guys were really game. The other guy had some pretty good shots early, and Frederick had to stand up to it. It was an interesting matchup. It was fun.
Maybe we can get LB or Jay Miller on the phone with him.
Yeah. No, those guys know how to do it. Or Chris Nyland, who was with us for a while as a Bruin and really knew how to tie up the other guy's right hand or punching hand, depending on whether it was right or lefty, mostly the right arm, and getting his shoulder all tangled up with grabbing the sweater and negating his ability to get free and throw his best punch. But
who's your top three?
Those guys. I mean, get Nyland on someday, because we had him on a podcast that I was doing for a while, and he was fascinating at how he talked about the art of fighting.
Who's your top three? Who's your top three Bruins fighters all time? Do you have Stan Jonathan at the top, or?
You know, that's a good question. I have O'Reilly has got to be in the top three just because he wanted to fight every day. You know, he was just incessant in his willingness to fight and to right every evil. But I have Al Secord in there. Al Secord was a left-hander who was just massive with his ability to mow people down with a left-hand shot. And then I'd say probably, you know, Jonathan. I mean, he's only about 5'9", but he was so tough, and you couldn't hurt him. And the same is true of Jay Miller. Yeah. You just couldn't possibly hurt those guys. And Jay and Stan, I'll give them a co-title. How's that?
All right, that's good. That's good.
Mike, when you think about the fighting element, you know, not being in hockey as much, does that play into the fact of now when we watch the physicality of a lot of these games? And, you know, we always think about the big bad Bruins, but because there's not as much fighting and there's not the enforcers and people don't have to worry about that, has that affected the game of it being physical and being able to make plays on pucks and corners, or guys be willing to go into corners?
I think so. I mean, listen, they've legislated a lot of things out of the sport because of the concussion issues, and that's only reasonable to ask for it. And it's only a matter of time before the fighting just disappears forever as well. But yeah, it means people can be a little bit more liberal with their abilities to go into the corners or make cheap shots. But then again, the league has done a pretty good job, I think, of identifying those cheap shots and penalizing them and making it difficult to get away with that. So they're sort of stepping up to the plate in the absence of, you know, the fighters, and they're trying to do the job legislatively, not with fists.
And
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the only reason why I asked that, because I think there was a play last night in the game where the puck came down the boards, and McAvoy, rather than play the puck, he kind of just like stepped back because he was more concerned about the hitting. Yeah. So I'm wondering if and that's why I said, does it seem like when you watch it, the physicality there's not even checking no more, even legal checking?
Well, I thought McAvoy had several big time hits last night. I thought it was great, but it's to get to the core of it, I think, Wiggy, hitting and fighting used to be a tactic, and no longer is it thought of as a tactic. And that does change the nature of the game and makes it a kinder, gentler place, for lack of a better phrase.
Well, speaking of McAvoy and the potential for pairing him up with a lefty, trade deadline looming. What is your guess at what this team does, if anything?
Well, they played well enough. The schedule is, deceptively. They've played some really crappy teams along the way here in this run, but they're playing harder. I got to give them credit. They're playing with a lot more moxie. I mean, last night was an exception. Back-to-back games, they didn't have quite, and no Bergeron. They didn't have quite the spunk that I thought they needed. They have to play hard every game, and I guess they've done enough so that Don Sweeney could feel free to go out and pick up a left shot defenseman, or maybe toy around with somebody that could be a legitimate second line center, because they don't have one. Eric Holla is not a second line center. That's a myth. That's just, they're filling a hole with a guy who should be on the third or fourth line. And so if I'm him, I'm looking for that left shot defenseman with McAvoy, maybe somebody with a little bit more physical presence, but just a solid defender, and somebody that could fill the spot temporarily as a second line center. And I wouldn't be willing to part with lots of assets to get that guy, because I'm still not a believer that this team can go real deep.
But that third line, I feel like the key to their success right now is that third line, the way that third line is playing.
Yeah, and the fourth line too. I think I mentioned it last week. I think they're playing like Don Sweeney had envisioned when he picked up those guys like Holla and Foligno, guys that would play hard every night and would make it difficult for their opponents. Not that they're excessively skilled, but they're skilled in the department of will, and that's a big part of the game.
Mike, we've talked to you about trading the older guys to maybe get some new blood in there and who you could build this team around going forward. When you look at the younger guys, Cassidy's saying that Charlie Coyle's playing probably the best hockey he's seen him play to date right now. Is he a guy that you could build this team around moving forward?
Well, he could be a key component. I mean, a key. What is a third line center? Is that key? That's important. But when we started back in the beginning of the season and Krejci was going to be gone, I know they were trying to squeeze Charlie Coyle into a second line situation. He's not that. He's a great third line center, and he's terrific, and that's important to have balance through your lineup. But it doesn't eliminate the hole in the number 2 spot, which is more important and more essential to your offensive productivity.
Mike Milbury's our guest, and I want to talk a little bit about DeBrusk. And if you were Don Sweeney, you've been a GM, if you were Don Sweeney and you look at most likely you're not going to tender him that $4 million offer at the end of the season, are you, and he's fallen off a little bit, I feel like in March anyway, I think he has 1 point in the last 6 games, are you willing to risk getting nothing for him if you don't deal him away by next week?
Well, he's stated again through his agent that he doesn't want to be there, and I'll give him credit. He apologized to his teammates sort of for making it difficult for him at this time, but it's clear something's happened. He wants out. I would investigate every possibility. I think I think you're right. He's fallen off a little bit, but isn't that his MO? Yeah. He sort of rises a little bit and then falls back off a little bit, and then he gets hot for a little while. Is that the player he is for the rest of his career? He's still young enough to think that he might be able to figure it out, but he doesn't want to be here. He must have some reason for not wanting to be here. So probably a good idea to look to get the best possible deal from a trading partner that doesn't give him away, and he could easily keep him through the end of the year and do something with him, before the draft. But it looks like it's not going to have a happy ending for Jake DeBrusk until he gets moved. So I would be certainly willing to talk to anybody about trading DeBrusk for either an up-and-coming second-line center, which was not an unreasonable ask, or a stay-at-home hard-nosed defenseman. Also not an unreasonable ask.
Mike, when you talk about the second line sentiment and with the trade deadline, coming upon us in the next couple of days, should there be some concern with the Bergeron injury and potentially having an infection? And if so, does that maybe change the approach for how you might be trading for a guy, knowing that, well, we not only do we need a second line centerman, we might need some depth just in case Bergeron's not able or has to be out for an extended period of time?
It's really hard to answer the question without knowing what the hell is wrong with Bergie, but I mean, he's nearing the tail end of his career. He's going to be more susceptible to injury, more susceptible to fatigue. He's been an amazingly consistent performer, but he's still a human being. And yeah, there's going to be concern about that. If there was real questions about whether he could continue through the rest of the season at a high level, boy, that would certainly change my thinking as a manager, because without him in the number one spot at center and playing at full throttle, your chances of doing anything damaging in the playoffs is next to none. I mean, that he's so essential to this team right now. But without him being 100%, it's going to change your thinking. And I don't know way to answer that question of how good he'll be come, May 1st when the playoffs begin.
Cassidy was asked about nearing the end of the trade deadline and how it's just business as usual. As a head coach, are you able to do just business as usual? Are you constantly thinking or reading about what the team might be doing or trying to ask questions?
I think your biggest concern, Courtney, is to make sure that the players are on even keel. Like you got to talk to them. If there's whispers about DeBrusk, say, hey, listen, talk to the kid and figure out what's inside his head. He's got to be nervous, right? I mean, anybody who's come out and said, I want to be traded, I want to go someplace, and now the manager can't seem to make the move happen, has to be a lot of internal pressure on him. So trying to get to him would be important. Trying to get to the team and get them focused on the task at hand and not worry about it. It is a pressure cooker in the days coming up to the trading deadline. There's no doubt about it. And I think the only answer to that is to continue to discuss with people their situations and ride it out till it's done. Every team's in the same boat.
But does Don Sweeney not want to make the move, or is he unable to make the move? Is he unable to get is there no interest in DeBrusk?
Oh, there's got to be interest in a player like DeBrusk. It's a matter of level. And DeBrusk has made it more difficult by saying he wants out. He doesn't want to be there. So that all of a sudden puts pressure on Sweeney to try to come up with something that makes sense. And, I applaud him for not rushing into a trade just because DeBrusk says he wants out. Just make the right deal. You've got a talent. He's, the question is he a second-line player? Is he a third-line player? Can he get consistent? All those things that other teams see, but there isn't any doubt that he's a player that's able to play regularly in the league. And when he's on, is a pretty effective component.
Hey, Mike, so there's rumors that the Bruins could be linked to Jacob Chychrun. Would that be a name that would interest you at the trade deadline?
Yeah, he's a guy that can play with a little bit of grit, and he can play with some tenacity, and sure, absolutely. What the question is, what's the cost? I mean, and he's played on this abysmal team for a long time now, and you're going to think you're going to get a wounded animal for a little while, but yeah, that's a name that I've heard. I've also heard they were interested or kicking the tires at Claude Giroux in Philadelphia. Those are reasonable names. The question is, what's the price? What's the cost?
There's also who's the Ducks? The
Emilio Estevez,
Lindholm. There's also some talk about that deal.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's certainly a much more complete player, a much more efficient player, skilled player, if you will. And I certainly would have interest in him. And grabbing another defenseman when you're heading into the playoffs is always a good idea. But you can get a player of that caliber, you've done yourself a world of good.
Hey, Mike, when you are in the front office and a player comes out and says he wants to be traded and you say, okay, we're actively trying to trade him, Does that lower the value? Because you're always talking about what's the price that you're going to get or give up. Does that lower the value that you get back because teams know that this guy wants out and you're, obviously looking
You have
to
no choice but to get rid of him, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It just puts all the pressure. And if the kid could have gone to Don Sweeney and said, and his agent, if it had half a noodle, said, listen, we're in an incompatible situation. I don't want to make it more difficult for you, but there's no way we're going to get around this because he and Cassidy don't get along, or you and the player don't get along. We're just not going to be happy here. So do us both a favor. Make your best deal over the next couple of months, or then I'm going to have to go public with my demands to be traded. That would have made it so much easier than just come out and say, hey, I can't take it anymore. I don't know the backstory. Again, maybe they did do that, but you're absolutely right that it puts the general manager in a much more vulnerable position than had he had the ability to trade it without the public demand to be moved.
Hockey aside, just in celebration of St. Patrick's Day, you've had quite a few St. Patrick's Days in Boston. Do you have a favorite memory?
Yeah, my friend Marty Coyne his family was from South Boston, and they moved to Walpole, and they took me into the St. Patrick's Day parade one year, where I don't know where I was, somewhere, but it was just a revelation from a kid from the suburbs to go in, and I had a meatball sub that I'll never forget with Marty Coyne. And I want to thank Marty because I beat him up last one of my first hockey team.
Who has a meatball sub on parade day in Southie?
Yeah, you should be. That
I
should
know.
be the feast.
I don't know why, but it was the best I ever had.
Should be having that during the St. Anthony's feast.
I was hoping for like a wild story, a meatball sub.
No, I don't know. That was my first St. Patrick's Day, and it was just we were in there all day, and Marty's old man drove home. I don't know how he was blind drunk, so I don't know how we managed to get home safely, but we did. But that was a different era, obviously, and it was fun to be in the city on St. Patrick's Day. It always is, and it's I'll miss it this year, but I'll still have the corned beef and cabbage cooking in the background.
Enjoy that, and we will talk to you again next week, Mike Milbury.
All right, kids. See ya.